Remember the, what was that they had at the Baptist church when the kids, they had a wedding with kids and Priscilla was the bride and I made her dress?
Yes.
Tom Thumb wedding.
The Tom Thumb weddings, yes.
Remember those?
Oh,
the
yes.
Tom Thumb weddings.
Yes.
I got a water in my pocketbook.
Yes, Tom Thumb weddings. Priscilla was in that. Yes, yes, yes.
Do you remember I made her dress for that?
Yes, and
Probably
what was
don't
that
know.
little girl that Monica Montgomery? Yeah.
We're just gonna be chatting. We're just gonna be chatting.
There's only 2 candy bars actually, and there's 4 of us. That's what I
She was doing the math on the candy bars.
That's right.
Adam, you ready for us? I'm waiting for your signal.
Yep, we're ready.
All right, ladies, you all set? So thank you for being here with us today, Khadija, Joan, and Charlotte. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. We want to talk a little bit about the Black Caucus that was formed in 1972 and your involvement in that, and then anything else you want to talk to about Princeton, your experiences here as part of Princeton. But the caucus seems to me that it was a very diverse cross-section of the Black community back in the day. There's actors, preachers, community group leaders, administrators, Princeton University staff members, quite an eclectic group of folks. Tell us to me a little bit about yourselves, we'll just go around, and then tell me a little bit about your experience with the caucus. Charlotte, why don't you start us off?
Well, I came to Princeton with my husband, Reverend Leon Gipson, and our 5 children, and got involved in some of the community activities later, the NAACP, which was where I spent a lot of my time. I think Joan would be better to speak about the caucus. I really have problems remembering all the intimate details.
It's been 50 plus years,
yes,
right?
it has. It's been quite a long time. But we spent 10 wonderful years here in Princeton, and 4 of our 5 children graduated from Princeton High School, and I got a chance to work in the Princeton school system while we were here. So I really enjoyed my time here at Princeton.
Wonderful. Joan, what about you? Black
Well,
Caucus.
I was director of the Princeton Joint Commission on Civil Rights. In fact, that was when I just first became director. I became director in '73. And they called it the Joint Commission because in those days they had a borough and a township. So that's why it was called the Joint Commission. We were instrumental in starting the Black Caucus. In fact, we would plan different groups or different, what I want to say, every year we would have something different. We would incorporate something different. I noticed that in one of the articles it talked about housing, and that's when we started the Witherspoon-Jackson Development Corporation, although we didn't call it that then. It became that joint agency then, and it started with members of the commission, the Civil Rights Commission. Every year we would earmark something different to have as a Princeton project. And if we want to talk about now, and I was director of the Civil Rights Commission for 20 years, from 73 to 93. A lot of things we did, or I did, wasn't favorable amongst a lot of the people in Princeton, especially the police, because that's one of my, what do I want to say, big complaints was against the police, not only with Black people, but with women. How they would stop women and how they would stop Black people. So my name was Mud as far as I'm concerned with the police department. And that was mainly with the township police department. We have township and a borough, that's why it was joint. The borough policemen were liberal and weren't as, what do I want to say, vicious, mean. So that's some of the things that I did when I was director of the Civil Rights Commission.
So interesting, thank you for that. And
You're
Khadija, Black Caucus, 1972. Tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
1972, I wasn't in Princeton in 1972. I came a little later.
Okay.
After high school, I left for college, and I was in New York. So at the time that I was part of the youth center, I had just returned to Princeton
Oh, wow.
from being in New York. And I was here at that time about maybe 3 years, and then I returned to New York. So I might be kind of sketchy.
That's
A
not
lot of
sketchy
the
at all.
things, yeah, I actually wasn't here. But my background is in social work. I worked at the youth center in the capacity of working with youth around careers and going to college. The caucus, see, what do I remember with the caucus? Oh, Jenny Ewell, we wanted her, she was a black woman, and we wanted her to be the principal of, was it Riverside?
No, John Witherspoon, I thought, but I might be wrong.
Well, one of the schools, Community Park, it was Community Park, right, so that's the one issue that I remember.
Because what was the mission of the Black Caucus at the time? Do you guys remember? How would you articulate why did it exist? What was its core mission?
Well, I think a lot of things were happening in Princeton community-wise, and I can't identify the person, but a few people were talking, we need to do something about it and address these issues, and it was that type of organization.
It was also involved in the housing inspection, and I was on the housing board in the borough, the housing committee, and we would go out and inspect houses of black people who lived in Princeton. I remember once we went to a house that had a second floor apartment. A woman lived there with several children, and there was a hole in her kitchen floor. It went right down, you could see down into the apartment below her, and she had children. And the owner had been requested several times to repair this hole that a child could fall through.
Wow.
And he didn't, so we went to inspect that house. And of course, then we proceeded to press charges, and he was required. He was an absentee landlord, but this woman with several children, and I remember looking at that hole and thinking about my youngest son, who was very precocious, and how many times he would have fallen in. But it was that kind of thing, that there were things that were happening in the community that were not being addressed. And some of us felt that they needed to be looked at very carefully and addressed, and something done about them.
Yeah, some of the things that came up in some of the articles were like overpricing in the drugstores, rent control, some of the infrastructure like broken sidewalks and things like that as well. What about you, Joan? Do you remember? How would you describe the mission of the Black Caucus?
Well, my mind takes me a while to think about 50 years ago. We had so many different missions or ideas that the Civil Rights Commission used to work on. You have to come back to me because I have to
Yeah, no
think
worries. No worries whatsoever.
about different things. I know the police community relations. Charlotte talked about the housing. So we had several things that we did.
Yeah, those are all big issues in and of themselves. I mean,
Yes.
each one in itself is a big issue. You know, there's a Town Topics article that described the Black Caucus as a watchdog group. And it said it responded to developments in Princeton as warranted in the interests of the Black community. Was there one event or development that was kind of the last straw that made folks gather to create the Black Caucus? Anything in particular that you recall that occurred that said, okay, we need to do something about it?
I think the police community relations did, because there were many, many complaints about the way the police treated not only, like I said, Black people, but women. And these were white women, not Black women. And they would stop people just to harass them, we would say. And that was one of the big issues we had. Follow behind them when they're driving. I know I had a couple come into my office to complain that they had driven up Washington Road and they noticed that a police car was behind them. And, you know, they didn't pay it any attention. And then when they turned onto Nassau Street, the police car was still there following them. And they said that, you know, that they didn't pay any attention to it either, again. And then when he came down Nassau Street and turned to Byard Lane, which was 206, the car was still there, and then it stopped them on the side of the road. And then they asked why were we stopped? And there was no concrete or definite answer. They just stopped them because they were Blacks and wanted to know where they were going in Princeton. Why were they driving through Princeton? And they were very upset about that. And we talked to the chief of police and registered that complaint. Why were you following behind them just because they were Black? Why did you stop them just because they were Black? And there was no really concrete reply. And like I said, a lot of the police in the township did not like me because they thought I started problems, but I didn't start problems. People came to me with these complaints.
John Lewis getting into some good trouble there? What about you, Khadija or Charlotte? Do you remember any? Was there a particular development or event that you can recall?
Well, I remember one of the things that we always talked about was the elections in Princeton. They were not really well participated in by Blacks. And a lot of them said, well, my mistress told me don't vote, don't do this, don't do that, you know. So we were trying to tell them to vote. And I know that that was one area that we did try to work on. We sent flyers and we told people we would take them to the polls and things like that. But it was a hard road because the atmosphere said don't vote. You know, don't vote. Don't pay attention. Same way with salaries. Some of them, we asked them what their salaries were, and they said, well, it depended on what the mistress had in the house. Somebody worked all day and got a dozen eggs, and maybe 2 were missing. And this was surprising to me, you know.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you should say that because, you know, Princeton has been described as the northernmost southern town. So when you think about your lived experience, your personal lived experience, you gave me some examples of complaints you received from other people, but your personal lived experience in Princeton in 1972 as not only a Black person but as a woman as well, to your point, Joan. Any anecdotes or things you can recall that you'd like to share?
I don't remember any specific against me or my family. Maybe because they knew that they couldn't take advantage of us because we spoke up. But, I remember one of the seminars we had at the Civil Rights Commission had to do with housing and rentals. And that I'm searching, my mind is searching. We had someone come from Washington, D.C. to discuss what could be taken out of your paycheck. It had to do with salaries. And I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
when Charlotte mentioned that, it reminded me of the lady we had come to give a seminar on what could be taken from your check and what could not be taken from your check. Because, and what should be taken from your check, that was not. Social Security, I think it started now. Then when Social Security could be taken out of your check, which was not.
Yes, we found this quite a few of the people who were working were getting wages and they were not being taken, having Social Security, which meant when they grew older, they didn't have Social Security. And that was like, I was in business, and so that to me was like, I couldn't believe that people would work their whole lives and have nothing. I mean, because they put nothing in, and you know, it wasn't really the government's fault. It was the fault of the employer who did not want to be bothered being an employer, but they wanted to have the workers, and they had the workers, and they paid them with a dozen eggs, like I said, and whatever, with a few eggs missing sometimes, or they paid them with a pair of almost brand new stockings. This one member told me. I said, okay, you know, just this was their pay for working all day, and we thought that was kind of, well, we knew it was wrong. You know, we knew it was wrong. From my involvement with the Housing Commission, I was elected to one of the Princeton Consolidation Study Commissions for combining Princeton Township and Borough. And that was quite an experience. I learned so much working on that commission, but the thing that I learned most was that the Black community did not support me in having the township and the borough consolidated. They wanted the borough to stay separate because it had the university. Now, what that did for them, most of them were not involved in the university. I could never figure out, but they did not want the association with the township. And I had my car windows broken, my tires slashed. I mean, it was all from the borough. It was not from the township, because they knew when we had a meeting and we were supposed to express our concerns and what we thought about the consolidation, I said that I was for it because I felt that Princeton was such a small community and the borough was the hole in the donut, and that's what we used to call it. And you know, we needed to have some support, and that was not felt in the borough as part of what they saw. They wanted to keep their exclusivity, which didn't give them much, but they wanted to keep that.
Did you ever fear for your personal safety?
I did, but I was younger then, and I didn't feel as threatened probably as I should have, except my tires were slashed, and so that was serious, but my husband took my car and got it fixed, and so, you know, it wasn't really a problem, but I knew that, and I got notes, you know, do not vote for consolidation, you know. I did, but the consolidation did not go through.
I was going to say that.
No,
took
it
a
did
while
not.
before
It took
a long while.
several. I think there were maybe 6 or 7, maybe 8 consolidation study commissions, and we worked I mean, that was, every day I'd go home and there was a packet of things to read, and I read them. I didn't read them in depth, but I skimmed them also that I would be able to discuss things at the next meeting. But it took several consolidation study commissions, and I left in 81, and they still hadn't consolidated,
That's right.
and that was in 79. I was on that commission, and it took years and years and years before the borough would vote. The township voted all the time to consolidate, and the township had ratables. The borough had no ratables at that time. It was sad. It was really sad.
There was another article from the 70s that's, where one black resident was quoted as saying, "Blacks in Princeton are mostly spectators. We are considered outsiders." Did you feel that? Did you and your families feel that? What was the feeling in the Witherspoon-Jackson community and elsewhere around how much we belonged, that sense of belonging to Princeton for the black community?
Oh, I think they felt they belonged to the black community, but in a certain aspect of it, as the servant class. And they didn't want anything to disturb that. I felt that very definitely. They didn't want to associate with the township at all. And I thought the township had ratables, they had land, they would help the tax situation. The tax situation in Princeton was always kind of difficult. It was a concern. I mean, that's why the study commission, I think, was developed, because of the tax rate in Princeton.
What was your recollection?
I think that's an excellent question, regarding the races in Princeton. Because when I think back growing up, I went to the township schools. So when we had the township and the borough, I was in the township, I lived on Lee Avenue, so that's the first street in the African American community. That was the first street, so you had Lee Avenue, you had Birch Avenue, and they were the last two streets, and then you had a few people on Lower Witherspoon Street. So my mother was very instrumental in helping to integrate the township at the time. I mean, there's a lot of stories about the borough, but I think the township was a little more quiet. At the time, there was a Mrs. Eisman, who was Mrs. Eisman was the principal at Valley Road School. And she heard about my mother. She was interested in integrating the schools. And with their collaboration, essentially the schools were integrated. It was my sister and a couple of others, Sandra Burrell, Tish Fish, if you remember Tish Fish. And there was another young lady, I think there were three, that actually integrated the township schools in Princeton. So that was around the I would say maybe mid-50s. Or maybe maybe a little earlier in the 50s.
I think it was earlier.
Yeah.
And I was in the borough.
You were in the borough.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I went to, at first, the all black
Yeah.
borough school. And then they integrated the schools, and I was one of the ones that went to Nassau Street School. I was in second grade.
Third or second, third.
I was in second grade when they integrated the school. Now, Sandra, your sister, and Tish Fish, and they went to the township schools, but they still were the same age as I was. And we got back together in the middle school, which happened to be 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But I started out in the borough schools, in the all-black borough school, where we had all-black teachers also. So one of your things in the township, you all stayed in the township schools all the way.
In the township. So there were fewer, since there were just a few black streets in the township, there were fewer students.
Yes.
Right.
So my experience, because of that, my experience was being the only black student. I was the only black student in all of my classes from K through 12 except one. 10th, I would remember, 10th grade English.
And it's
And there was
funny,
one other.
it's funny
one other,
because
yeah.
some of the people complained about they wanted to be the only black student that lived in the borough. And when they integrated the schools, that they felt that they weren't given as much attention being in the integrated schools. Now, I never felt that way. I don't know.
I didn't feel like that.
I never felt that way either. I don't know if it was because I participated in athletics, so I was very athletic. And ones that complained mostly, believe it or not, were males. Some of the fellas thought that they were discriminated upon. They weren't asked questions. They weren't asked to participate, and they were they did not like it when they integrated the schools.
They would get something different, I would imagine.
Or
But
they,
the general experience was, it was not dramatic at all. And I really don't feel remember any, nothing. It was, nobody had an attitude. You were just there at school, and, that was it. It wasn't, I didn't experience it as an integration experiment or, an integration thing, so. It was all very smooth and all of that. But that was so when I started school, it was about 3.5 years after my sister started. She was then 3.5 years older.
From what we can find out, it looks like the Black Caucus might have been disbanded around 1977 or so. Do you guys recall, what year maybe that was? And if so, what the process was? Was there a particular event that caused it to be disbanded, or did it just kind of filter out slowly, or do you remember?
I was gone at that time. I had left Princeton at
Fair
that
enough.
time.
I was here, and I don't remember it being disbanded. And because we had so many projects that we meaning the Joint Commission on Civil Rights, every year or every 2 years, we would have a new director. And I don't remember it dissolving or why it dissolved.
When specifically?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you recall there was a mention of black town halls in like the 70s that drew 100 to 200 people, I think organized by the Black Caucus? Does that ring a bell to anyone? Do you remember the big black town hall meetings, bringing people together from the community to talk about these issues?
I don't.
No, I don't remember that at all.
Article referenced 5 of them in the 70s.
I would remember that, but I don't remember that.
I know the NAACP was active at that time too, and I was a member of the NAACP, but I don't remember black town meetings.
Me either.
Where would they
And
be
this
held?
was in Princeton?
But I believe so. That's what the article led me to believe.
Where were they held?
It didn't say. It didn't state
can't
where.
imagine.
I don't either.
What
that we
facility?
couldn't
Maybe a
remember
church.
that.
Could have been
Well,
one of the churches,
but
maybe.
My husband left in '81, so he would have been involved in that probably because he was one of the most active ministers in Princeton.
And you had the 3 ministers from the 3 black churches were all part of the Black Caucus.
Yes,
So
yes.
maybe, yeah.
Also, Reverend Guidry, who was at the Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal Church on Birch Avenue, he was involved
Yes, he
also.
was.
Okay.
Yes, he was.
All right. Yeah.
He was very involved.
So look, here we are today, 50-some years after you guys in the Black Caucus. What advice do you have for future generations? You still have some black folks living in Princeton now. What do you see that you like that's going on? What do you see that you think, what should be the issues or the things they should be addressing today?
Well, my big concern is that the children need to be really encouraged to get as much education as you can. And I think that's always been our concern, is to make sure that the children of the community were as interested in getting an education so that they could get a decent job and provide for themselves. And also the general welfare of the community. Be involved in your community. I mean, all of us were involved in the community. And I think that that's something that might be waning now. I don't know. There are some activities that people are involved in, but I think everybody should be involved, not just a few people. I mean, it takes a community to make a decent living for children and seniors. And now that I'm a senior, I know that there's a lot of senior needs in communities that people need to pay attention to.
I would add that there's a different social structure now after gentrification in Princeton. So our youth aren't experiencing Princeton like we experienced Princeton. So it's a much, it's much harder for them to have mentors, reaching out to people. It's just a really different place for them now.
Good point. Anything to add, Joan?
I don't think the parents are as strict as they were when we were coming up. And that might be the reason why the youth aren't included in a lot of things. When we were raised, there were things you knew you could do and things you knew you couldn't do. And people were involved even in the churches more. All the youth went to church.
Somebody's church.
Yes, in fact, we went to, not only, I was a member of First Baptist, but not only did I go to First Baptist, I went to fellowship at the Presbyterian Church, Witherspoon Presbyterian Church. So we went to both churches, and we went to Bible school in the Methodist Church. So we participated in all the church activities. But I don't think the kids, I know when I noticed that the kids who were in a dance group, for instance, after they finished dancing, they went home. Whereas, and I'm talking about the dance group at First Baptist, had a real good dance group. The kids started at 5 and 6 years old and went through high school. And after the dance group finished, they would go home, and I said to the dance, the head of the dance, you should make those children stay and participate in church services. But a lot of them didn't, and their parents didn't even make them stay. So they weren't involved in church groups, whereas we all were involved in all the services at the churches. Even in the summertime, when they had summer school and different activities in the summer, we were always involved.
Oh, and one of the changes, you talked about the changes is, it sounds as though the Princeton that you grew up in, oftentimes your teachers lived in your neighborhoods, right? They were your neighbors, and now teachers can't afford to live in Princeton, right? The price of housing in Princeton has risen dramatically. And so a lot of the people who kind of form the core of our communities, like teachers, like pastors, like public servants, policemen, et cetera, don't live in the community because they can't afford to do so, which changes, to your point, the experience of the children in the community. That's very, very interesting. Very interesting. I guess the last question I would have for you would be, so here we are at the Arts Council. We're doing this conversation at the Arts Council, basically in the center of downtown Princeton, adjacent, right inside the community in the heart of Witherspoon-Jackson. How can the Arts Council help in terms of some of these things that you guys were talking about, I'll call them some of the warnings? You talked about education, right? You talked about discipline and more community feel. Is there something the Arts Council can be doing differently or better to address some of those concerns or those issues, so that we ensure that the children growing up in Princeton today, particularly the Black children, have a robust experience similar to the one you've had.
When I was coming up, this Arts Council used to be the Black YMCA, YWCA. We're sitting in the recreation room now where half of it was the YWs and half of it was the YMs. And
You need to come here for parties too.
we came here for everything.
A lot of memories here.
Yes, they had different directors, a YM director and a YW director. I remember even going to visit the YW director. She lived in Pittsburgh, and we went and visited her through one of her friends that happened to be our club leader. This building was a Black building back in the day. When it was the YMYW of Princeton, Black YMYW, Black YMYW of Princeton, and had all kinds of classes for Black youngsters, men on the men's side and women on the women's side. So this building, which is now the Arts Council, used to be the Black YMYW.
And when it was the Princeton Youth Center, most of the students who came here for recreation with Jabby Holmes, education with Fred, and the theater with Terry Steaple, and the dance with Terry
Yeah.
Austin,
Austin,
you know, and my
They
daughter.
were university students.
They were university students who came here and they worked, and my daughter was in the dance from the time we came here. She was 10. She had been dancing when we lived in northern Jersey, and of course when she came to Princeton she didn't know anybody, and I was working at the youth center and I got her signed up to go to dance, and she was not happy. Not happy. And I told her, well, you can go until what I paid for is finished, and then you can quit. So that next day I came down and I said, oh, today's the day you quit dance. Well, of course.
She said, Mom, I want to stay
She
in.
was, oh, you know.
I'm not quitting.
No, and she never did. She never did. But, you know, I think that we have to understand that the Black community will prosper only when we have Black leaders. Because children need to see people like themselves so that they can grow up to be like the leaders who they are emulating. And I was very pleased that my children grew up when the youth center was at its, I think it's one of its heights.
Yes.
And they saw people who were excellent at what they did. The people who ran it at the time that I was the administrator, Leonard Brown was a graduate of Princeton University, Terry Steaple was a graduate of Princeton University, Terry Austin was a graduate of Princeton University, and Jabby, even though he wasn't a college student, was very kind and a gentle giant who had a lot of feeling for the youth of this community.
Yes, he lived in the community all the time.
Yes, and he encouraged them in ways that made them grow and do better and to think good thoughts about themselves, which I always appreciated in him.
Yeah.
He was really a gentle giant, and that's how I think about him. And so the children had the best education, feeling, community. They had that, yes. And I think it makes a difference in how young people progress. So I think that that's what communities need to model after.
And we were fortunate in having the university students.
Yes.
They really added a lot.
Oh,
and at that
yes,
time, they had, didn't they have a, I know they did have, I don't remember the name, what would you call it?
Community
Like-
house, are you thinking of?
Yes,
Community house, that was Fred.
That was Fred.
That was Fred, yes.
It was community house, it was
Okay,
part of it.
okay,
Yes.
it was community house. So they added a lot. They added a lot to the community in general. And
They had
to,
classes.
Mm-hmm.
We even went to New York with a group of them.
Wonderful.
Yeah, because they went to, my daughter went to New York to see Alan Ailey, and then they brought Alan Ailey here.
What a wonderful
And it
experience.
was, she's never forgotten that night. And they worked out with Judith Jameson, and my daughter said, Mom, they don't stop. They just keep going and going and going. And we're laying on the floor. And I said, yes, but they're professionals, Priscilla. And I said, that's what makes the difference. It's their craft, and they are owning it. And so, you know, the experience that they had.
Witnessing that excellence and that passion is something that can inspire an entire generation.
It can. It really can.
Well, ladies, I appreciate the time with you this afternoon. Thank you so much, Khadija and Joan and Charlotte, for your time. On behalf of the Arts Council, greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to be here, thank you.
It's just nice to reconnect with my old pals.
And
Nice little reunion.
Oh,
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, we brought up a lot of good memories for you guys.
Yes.
We remembered.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.